Hi there. Today we're with Jubin in Canada, and I met Jubin in Santiago, Chile, working on the Temple of Light down there in Santiago. And he and a bunch of young guys came in and really, really did a great job and put a lot of energy into the temple construction down in Chile. So, Jubin, can you tell me a little bit about where you're from, how long you've been a Baha'i, and your last name?
My last name is it's actually Nakhai, but no one can really say that name. Most people just say Nakhai. Nakhai is a difficult name. I was born in Iran, Tehran, Iran, and I was born into a Baha'i family at a time when um, the country was under the Shah. So we were a Baha'i family, and things were uh, semi-normal. Iran was actually very industrious, but I was born in 1975, but in 79, the revolution happened, and Ayatollahs came into power, and it got really difficult for Baha'is. And so at that point, my family had to escape. We had to leave Iran. So um, that was then. The backdrop of it was that my family was well off, middle class. And when we got to Canada, we had to start from zero. We basically had to start. My dad had to work as a, cab driver, then had to work as a, doing whatever odds and end jobs he could to get his surveyor's degree, even though he was an engineer in Iran. And
Not easy
they
moving to a new country.
no, and then they had to start again from scratch. Uh, when I was young, I was just a kid. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was happening. But my parents told me, Jubin, when you go to school, don't tell anyone what your religion is. If they ask, just don't say you're a Baha'i because it was dangerous at that time. We didn't know, things were kind of dangerous. And I remember one day they came through the class, and I'm in like grade three. Like grade three is like super young. And they put these papers down, and in it you had to write your mother's name, your father's name, where you lived, all this information. And one of the lines was your religion. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, I don't know. My parents told me not to put Baha'i. So I didn't want to put Baha'i. But then, and I'm three. I don't even know what Baha'i or anything. Maybe I'd done a couple of children's classes, but no, I had no conception. I knew there was a God, and there's the Bob and Baha'u'llah, but maybe I would remember the name, maybe I wouldn't. But I just remembered the word Baha'i. So, and I knew my parents told me not to say it. So I was like, okay. So I left it. And then a little while later, the teacher came back and put the paper back down in front of me. And then I remember her hand pointing to that spot. She just like tapped on them. So I was like, for a moment, I was like, okay, maybe I'll just put Muslim. And then I was like, no, some weird little burst of pride in me. Even though I had no whatever, I was like, no, I'm gonna put Baha'i.
Right.
But when I wrote it down, I could feel that there would be consequences. I could feel that there'd be consequences, but I wrote Baha'i anyway, and I put it forward. And I was like, okay, that's not Baha'i. I'm not going to say I'm a Muslim because kids are kids. They're belligerent without any, you know. Anyways, teacher came back, said, okay, Jubin, you can go home. And I was very sad. I didn't know why she was sending me home. Usually kids that are bad get sent home. I was like second in the class, top class. And so I walked home, and my mom was like, why are you home? Like, teacher told me to go home. So anyway, she got on the phone, called my dad. He was in a different city working. He came back. They both went in. And I remember sitting in the hallway, and I remember my mom and my dad. And then I remember them talking, and then they came out, and she was crying on the way home. And I was like, why are you sad, Mama? And she's like, well, they can't go to school anymore. They can't go. She was so sad.
Oh, no.
I basically said, don't worry, Mama, I'll study hard and I'll become better than all of them. So, little things kids say. Years later, I would find out, because they would see the conversation, that they had gone and talked to the principal, and the principal had said, he's a Baha'i, he can't be here. And my parents, my mom and my dad had explained it's like, he's a Baha'i, but because he's born to a Baha'i family, that doesn't automatically make him a Baha'i. One of the tenets of the Baha'i faith is that when you become 15, you have to independently choose to become a Baha'i.
No.
And after independent investigation, how do you know that he won't choose to become a Muslim and becomes a better Muslim than you? And it
Oh,
was a very
very good.
formidable argument. And the principal at that point was like, I'm sorry, I realize what you're saying, but if I don't do this, they'll fire me, you know, and
Uh,
my life is in danger. And so my parents were like, okay, that was it. So after that point, they had to sell everything. They had to not even tell their family about, for the sake of me and my brother, they were like, what kind of life are they going to have? They can't go to school. And a couple of years later, the Iran-Iraq war started, and they were like, this is not a good situation. We got to get out of here. You know, the war has begun. We've got to flee the country. So we fled the country. We went to Pakistan. We spent a year in Nigeria. It was almost very dangerous. We could have that. Anyways, after all of that, I got to Canada. Now I'm in Canada. And as a young kid, I'm Baha'i. So I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't know why I don't. My parents just told me not to.
yeah.
So I never did. And one of the things that happens is that you kind of learn bits and pieces, and I kind of learned a little bit about the history of the Bob. I thought it was cool, but there was just so much information. I knew nothing. It was just something that I was like. I didn't do any of the investigation. I went to children's classes, but I was just a kid like other kids. If you ask me, what kind of shoes do you wear? I wear Nike. What kind of food do you like? I like pizza. What religion are you? I'm a Baha'i. But if someone would be say, oh, you know, Jesus, the way and the light, and I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. But I wasn't religious. And I was like, yeah, okay, maybe he is. You know, I wouldn't be like, why are you Baha'i? No,
Right.
you should be a Muslim. You should be a Buddhist. You should be a this. You should be a Anglican. You know, you're going to hell. Okay, sure, I'm going to hell. And I play with my GI. Yeah, whatever. I didn't. It wasn't a thing
Yeah.
until I got to be about 15. When I was 15, they were like, Juba, you Baha'i? And it was kind of almost a careless thing. I was like, yeah, I'm a Baha'i. Sure, I'm a Baha'i. I identify as Baha'i. I like the Baha'i faith. And it seemed reasonable from all the other ones, but it wasn't really a thing for me. It was just a moniker until we went on pilgrimage. So one day, my mom and my dad, my brother and me were like, yeah, we're going to go to pilgrimage. And I remember it was like, oh, I'm going to go to pilgrimage, I'm going to go to Israel. Now, as a young kid, you know, it's like, I think I was 18 at the time. I was like,
18. Okay.
I think I was 18 at the time. I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to Israel. You know, like this is going to be an exciting experience. And I remember that we got the ticket and I was like, oh, we're going to go to, but for me, it was just, hey, I'm going to an overseas trip. We would do this. We would go to the Philippines or we would go to Dallas, Texas, you know, or we go to wherever. And I like traveling. I enjoy traveling. So I was like, okay. So I'm like, okay. So the day before we were going to fly, I had to find my passport. And I remember putting it somewhere and I couldn't find it.
Oh
And I
no.
remember looking for it everywhere and I couldn't find it. And I remember being really like, I was like, no, I want to go on pilgrimage. And at that point, I realized this isn't just a trip. I actually want to go on pilgrimage. And for the first time ever in my life, ever, I prayed to God without just, okay, my parents want me to pray, I'm going to say this prayer, or oh, I'm in
Right.
children's going to say this prayer. For the first time, I was like, okay, God, like I was going through a stack of books and I'd gone through about this much of the stack of papers, and I was like, I don't think it's in this stack. So I just stopped because I was basically going through everything. I literally had gone through a stack of paper like this. It had gone to about here. I was going through every page looking for this passport, and then I stopped. It's like, okay, God. And I remember saying this. It was the first time I was like, I really want to go on this trip. If you exist and you believe that I should go, then I will find my passport. It was just that kind of an open sort of thing.
Right.
I didn't say Baha'i prayer because I didn't even know any by memory. I moved 2 pages and my passport was there.
Oh wow.
It was so sudden that I was like, oh. Then after that incident, without anyone knowing, without me telling my parents or anything, it's like I found it, I was happy. In my mind, I was like, okay, this isn't just a normal fun trip. I should pay attention. So I went on pilgrimage.
Yeah, quite a
And
confirmation. Oh my
it
gosh.
was it was something unique because when I
Yeah.
got there, I noticed a few things. One, at that time the terraces were being built.
Okay.
And they hadn't built the terraces. And Ben Gurion at that time was being dug up. And I remember walking, and I remember everywhere I went, I was sweating. I'd stand outside, I'd sweat. I'd go everywhere, I'd sweat. And I remember looking at these workers thinking, holy smokes, these workers are super, super tough. Like I remember at that time thinking, I can't even walk. I wish I could be this tough to work like that. And that's an important thought I had then. because little would I know that in
You'd be,
years to come, I would go there and I
you'd be
would be
going
working
there
that
and
hard
other
with
countries,
sweat pouring from my head and working with the stone.
right?
Anyway, that was an interesting thought I had at that time.
Yeah.
But there was three things that hit me right immediately. We would meet the House of Justice. I had no idea who they were. We met Ria Hanu, who was still alive, and she met us at the Pilgrim House, and all the youth were there. No idea who she was. I just knew she was important because everyone stood when she came in, and everyone listened with rapt attention. No one said a thing, so I just like listened. I listened to the things she said, but they went in one ear, out the other.
Mhm.
And then when she came by, she shook everyone's hands, and I wanted to reach out and shake her hand, but I was like, no. And she went by, and that was it. And um, I kind of looked and I saw two things. One, wow, this religion is not just this little community in, Swift Current, Saskatchewan, or Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, with some Iranians and some Westerners that meet. This is a world global thing. That was the first thing. I was like, and there's people that are really deeply knowledgeable and invested in this. And the second thing I realized, wow, I know so little about my own faith. I was embarrassed.
Oh no.
Shrine of Bob, I was like, I think the Bob, I know the Bob, that's it. And when I went through the archives building, I was like, I recognized the sword because I remember that from Sheikh Tabarsi, because as a young kid, that's the kind of
Yeah.
stories
Right.
relate and raise your sensitivity to understanding what this narrative is. But I didn't know who Abdul Baha was. I mean, I knew who he was, but not really. I just knew he has a picture. I didn't know what his relationship was to Baha'u'llah or the Bob. I didn't know who Baha'u'llah was. I knew that he was maybe the main manifestation, but I didn't understand any part of his life, what he did. I just knew he was like. And after that, I came back home. I was like, that was an awesome trip. There were some difficulties, there were some severe tests, but overall, it was an awesome trip. But then the seed was planted because in my mind, it just wouldn't let go. I was like, my parents are in this religion. This is something that is done by a lot of people, and they deeply study it. Like, and the thought just wouldn't leave my mind. Why did my parents are so deep into this thing? Why? And why did we leave Iran? Why didn't just say, okay, we're Muslim?
Right.
That's it. It stayed there. What is it about this that what is it about this religion that made them sacrifice everything to leave the country just because they were like, no, I'm going to be a Baha'i. You're going to be a Muslim and just live your life. I was just a dude. And if someone told me, hey, you just say you're a Muslim, I would have wrote Muslim on that paper. But my parents said, don't say anything. They didn't say
Right.
lie. They could have lied. And these thoughts just kept rolling and rolling. And then I was like, okay, I got to look into this. First of all, I got to understand. I can't, just be like. And the first book I picked up was Paul Lampel's compilation, Baha'u'llah's Teachings on Spiritual Reality. And I
Okay.
started reading because my dad had all the books. I just had never read.
Yeah.
And wow, one of the first topics it discusses was the nature of the soul and life after death. And I was like, oh, is this what happens with this? And the more I read, the more I got more. And it was like the writings just started to, and I started reading and I was like, wow, this is answering questions that I didn't even know I had. Nature of the soul. What is the nature of the soul? Nature of reality. When you hear something from the inside, what is that? And I've had deja vus up to that point
Oh yeah.
that I couldn't explain. And when I got to the section, writings regarding dreams, I was like, oh,
Hmm.
I'm not crazy. I'm not insane. Deja vus are something that your soul goes and experiences. And then there was like teachings about, you should behave this way. And I was like, but it was written in such a way that I was like, yeah, I believe in that. I want to be like that. It wasn't like, oh, this difficult and this. I'm like, no, I want to be this way.
That's
And when I
awesome.
read the Lawbreakers again and things, I was like, this is who it is and that. And then
This is in your 20s, early 20s?
this is in my from 18 to 22. And then I
Okay.
went to university um, when I was 24. And at that time, I remember the day that I was walking around campus with my friend Georgia, and she's like still friends with mine. We've been friends for like 20 some years. And we would talk deep philosophical things. I would work in the Hardy Laboratory. I'd write her all these emails, and she'd be in Copenhagen and she'd write me emails. And then I remember talking with her, and she asked about like, and we got into spiritual topics. I don't know how. And it was like, you believe in God? I'm like, at that point, I was like, yeah, I believe in God. And I found myself talking myself into saying, yeah, I'm a Baha'i. And I remember walking around the campus, and it was about 24. I was 24 years old.
Okay.
And I remember at that time saying, for the first time ever in my life, yeah, Baha'i. But at that point, it wasn't a matter of, oh, like if someone asks you, Drew, what are you? I'm like, oh, I'm a Baha'i. And if someone challenges you, and you're like, yeah, whatever, it's fine. I don't. But now I was like, no, now I'm a Baha'i. And then when people would ask me, I would be like, you don't drink? I'm like, no, I don't drink. Before it used to be, I don't drink because, I just, kids like to be different. I like to be different. Now I'd say, no, I don't drink because I'm a Baha'i.
Bye-bye.
And then what would happen is I got challenged and tested. What do you mean Baha'i? What is this? And when Christians would talk to me, I would no longer just be like, yeah, okay, maybe you're right. When they would challenge me, then I would be like, oh, I'd go back and I'd study and I'd be like, oh, this is what they said. Okay. Then I'd have an answer. Then they would challenge me in a different way. I'd go back and study the writings and be like, oh, okay. So in a way, I started to do the investigation because they were like, well, this guy says Jesus is the way and the light and the truth, and no one comes to God but me. And I went back and looked, and then I talked to my friends, and they're like, yeah, no, that's fine. But Abraham went to heaven. Yeah, he did. It says so in the Bible. He came before Jesus. Yeah. Okay. So now we can see that, okay, this is not a timestamp. Obviously, that means. And then, of course, Jesus himself also said, there are many things I wish to say, albeit you cannot bear it.
Mm-hmm.
But when the Spirit of truth comes to you, he will reveal to you all truth. Or in John 13:8, even, 13, I think John 13, chapter verse 15 or 6, 13 to 16, he said, 15 to 16, in that area, he talks about the comforter. He literally says, when the comforter comes to you, he will reveal to you all the things that I cannot, all the truth, right? It's in there. It's literally, it even says the glory of God. That's like Baha'u'llah. And at that point, I was like, oh, I see. Baha'u'llah is actually the promised return of Jesus. He is the Father. And at that point, I started to get like really deeply into the writings. And then I was a Baha'i, and I started to like pray, and I started to get confirmations, and I started to do that stuff. And it wasn't, I would talk to God all the time. My prayer life became really deep. And it was at this point that my identity as a Baha'i really started to gel. So now if someone asks if I'm a Baha'i, I could tell them with valid proofs and writings and logical explanations, like, this is why I'm a Baha'i. It's not just a religion. No. We don't have clergy. You learn on your own. No, we don't. No, science and religion are not two separate things that are fighting. Here's why they're the same. And here's the evidences, but there are two ways of looking at reality. All of these questions were rudimentary at its basis. And I remember what ended up happening was that I became a stone carver because I had realized at that point that money wasn't, reading the writing says money isn't the thing, and arts and crafts and seeking professions. And I had a rift in my life. I was working as an engineer at that time, and I was traveling all over the world. I was going to India. I was going
Okay.
to, so it was awesome. And I was working for 7 years. And then one day I realized, no, I need to quit and I need to find something. And I remember sitting down and saying a serious prayer. I said, okay, God, I'm going to do something different than what I'm doing now. And I set some criteria. I said, look, I can't be a starving artist anymore. I need to basically do something where I can go anywhere in the world. It can't be specific to one area. And it has to be something that I enjoy. Like, it has to be either something physically, because I did martial arts, or something artistic. I did arts. And when you pray, as the writings say, you have to make an action to be directed, so you can get confirmation one way or the other.
Right.
So I made the biggest action I could make. I quit work. I bought an open ticket to Europe, and I was just going to go. And I was going to let God guide me. So, okay, either you're going to be either you're going to be a lemon farmer in Greece, or you're going to drive a truck in Novosibirsk, or you're going to be a limo driver in Beijing, whatever.
Yeah.
So I quit, and I bought my open-ended ticket. So in that intervening month between when I quit my work and when I was getting ready to fly for an indefinite period to the other parts of the world, my friend came in from out of town. She said, hey, I'm in town. We're going to go for some drinks in the evening and have some dinner with friends, but I'm going to go visit my uncle's workshop. Do you want to come? I said, sure. I didn't know that the master would be there that, and he gave a tour to all of us, stone carving The only stone carving studio outside of Europe happened
Oh, is
to
that
be in
right?
when I first walked in, it basically bam, bam, bam. Before I even left on the trip, all the criteria were met. Here's a craft. It's working physically with your hands, but it's also artistic.
Hmm.
You can go anywhere in Europe and you can always do tombstones. And at that point, I was like, boom. And then I did that for 2.5 years, 2 years, solid carving. And then I was doing 6 months of commission work. And at that point, I was like, okay, God, this is what I want to do. You've pulled me this direction. What do I do? And my friend, Faisy had said, Jube, you should volunteer to go work in Haifa. And it was interesting because I was like, I'm not good enough to go carving there in Haifa. Plus, like they got like the temples. I need to go work at a palace or some chateau in Europe for, a decade to get good enough to go there. Lo and behold, I had no idea that the archives and the shrines were being restored. So that my funds were declining and declining, and I had about 2,000 left. And I said, okay, you know what? Why don't I just apply? Even if I work as like a guy working the toilets or a guy working whatever
Whatever you could
security,
do.
whatever I could do, I'll just go, because I'm running out of funds and I'll just go. And I remember looking at the things, and I remember the first time I filled it out that it was like, okay, you need to apply for at least a year. Okay, a year. God has done all of this wonderful stuff in my life, brought me out of Iran, gave me a wonderful profession, brought me to stone carving. I at least owe him a year of my life. I will give a year of my life. So that was the thing I made with God. I got a call from Mr. Saeed. Mr. Saeed is like, hello, Jubin. How are you? This and that. We talked. He's like, yeah, we need you right away. Here's the archives. I was like, that's it. I'm going to go there. But we need you for at least minimum of 5 years if the project takes that.
Oh my goodness.
And I remember being on the phone and I remember pausing and I was thinking, I can only give a year. I was going to give a year. And then I was like, okay, God wants 5 years. And I remember making a decision. Okay, I'll do it. I made a decision within about 2 minutes. I was like,
Wow.
yep, I'll do it.
Wow.
And then, of
Amazing.
course, when I got to Haifa, that's when I really started to learn and study. I learned all the Ruhi books. I started to read. I read every single writing of Baha'u'llah. And then I realized, okay, it's not just I'm giving a year of my life or 10 years of my life. God wants the rest of them. And at that point, I was confirmed. I was basically like, okay, yeah, I'm behind. That's that. Like, this is everything else falls underneath this. This is the center. Everything pivots around it.
That's awesome.
That's the long and short of
Really, really awesome.
That's
All
the
these
long and short.
confirmations along the way, and the challenges lead to more learning and more confirmations. And
Oh
how
yeah,
long were you in Haifa?
3.5 years the first time. We actually finished ahead of schedule, and then I went back 2 or 3 times, six different times. I went 1 month here, 2 months there. Then I went and I stayed for another year, and then I stayed another 6 months. So it's just been fun.
They needed
They
your
have
skills,
stone.
didn't they?
Oh, the stone. There's infinite amount of stone, and it's never going to end. And I'm the only, I think, one of maybe 3 Baha'i stone carvers in the world. Like stone carving is so little already, and the opportunity for me to work on those places is the greatest confirmation.
Oh yeah.
It's like I can see, okay, God directed me away from that and made me as a stone carver because I was needed to work on this project.
Wow.
And now I can lay down my chisel. What else are you going to do as a stone carver? I worked on the shrine. I don't even want to go to Europe and work. I've already worked on, as a stone carver, I have done the top, as a Baha'i stone carver, I've reached the zenith of what I could hope to work on.
Yeah. What a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
And I really, really thank you tremendously for sharing your story.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry.
I'm so happy to get the chance to be around you again. And even though
Oh,
we're
man, it was
in
nice seeing you
cyberspace,
again. Yeah, we worked
good to see
together.
you
It was great.
again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me end the recording and we'll finish up here. Okay. Thank you, Jubin. I appreciate it.